Hello friends, welcome to my channel. In this video, I am going to explain you why we require Docker Compose and what are the advantages of it. If you are new to this channel, please click on subscribe button and hit the bell icon to get all the notifications. Now to explain you why we require Docker Compose, I am going to run a phpMyAdmin application using plain Docker commands, and then I'll run the same application using Docker Compose. Now the reason I chose a phpMyAdmin application because it's a multi-container application. That means this application is comprised of two Docker containers. First Docker container is the PHP application, which is a front-end component. Second Docker container is the MySQL database, which is the backend component, right? And throughout this flow, you will understand how easy it is to use a Docker Compose to run a multi-container application. So let's get started. Now the first thing that I do here is I'll create a network of type bridge because I want a PHP application to connect to MySQL database using hostname. So let's create a network. A command to create a network is docker network create and the name of a network. I'm going to give a name which is mynet. Okay, so the command executed successfully. Now let us verify whether the network is created or not by listing down all the available networks. Now the next step is to first run a MySQL database Docker container. Why? Because there is a dependency. A PHP application is dependent on MySQL database. So if I create a PHP Docker container before the MySQL database, then it will fail. Okay, so that's the reason I will first run a MySQL database Docker container and then I'll run a PHP application Docker container. Okay, so let's run a MySQL database Docker container. So docker run. Now first thing is I will run this container in a detached mode. So I'll use option -D. I have to expose a port, so 3306 is the port I'm going to expose here, and then I will give a name, a backend, because it is a backend component. You can give any name, but I have chosen a backend name because it is very relevant to this. Next thing is network. So whatever network that we created, we also need to associate that network with this container. Next thing is it's a prerequisite for a MySQL database Docker container is you have to specify the MySQL root password. So to specify that, I'm passing that information through the environment variable. I will give a very basic password which is test. Okay, so we have specified the ports, we have specified the name, we have also specified the network. The last thing is we have to specify the image that I'm going to use to run this Docker container, which is MySQL latest. So I'll be using the latest version of it. Okay, now let's hit enter. The command executed successfully. Let us see the logs of this MySQL Docker container. Okay, so the logs is also coming. That means the container is running. Let's run the PHP application. So docker run, same thing. The port I'm going to expose here is 80. Name here is, I'll give a name front end because it's a front end application. Network, same network. So the prerequisite to run this Docker container is I have to specify three things. First thing is MySQL root password. Second thing is host name of a MySQL Docker container. Third thing is port number of a MySQL Docker container. So let's specify everything here. PMA host environment variable specifies the host name of a MySQL Docker container. So host name is the same as container name. Port number is 3306. And the last thing is I have to specify the image for this Docker container. Let's hit enter and run this Docker container. Again, let us see the logs of it just to verify whether the container is running properly or not. Yes, it is running fine. Now just to double check whether both the containers are running or not, let us list all the running containers here. So Docker PS will list all the running containers. Yes, so both the containers are running right now. Okay, now the next thing is we'll browse the application, we'll create a database just to verify the functionality of it. So let's browse an application just to verify the functionality of it. So the username is root and the password is test. Okay, let's just create a database. I'll give a name demo. Okay, and the database is created. Okay, now let us see how to remove these containers and how to remove the network. Okay, so here also we have to follow a particular sequence. So first I'll stop the front end container and then I'll stop the back end container. Now let's remove both the containers. And let us also remove the network that we have created. So we have cleaned up everything. You can see that just to run an application which comprises of only 2 Docker containers, we have to do a lot of things, right? We have to create a network, we have to run the containers in particular order. While running the containers, we have to specify everything in that command, right? So there are a lot of things that has to be done here, right? And same goes for removing an application, right? So here Docker Compose come into the picture. Now next thing is we'll do the same thing. We'll run this application, we'll remove this application using Docker Compose, and then you can see how easy it is to use it. How Docker Compose makes developer life so easy. Okay, so let us see that. Before we start, let me tell you brief about Docker Compose. So Docker Compose is a tool to compose an application which comprises of multiple Docker containers, and it follows the concept of infrastructure as a code. So what is infrastructure as a code? In infrastructure as a code, I'll write the instructions to create an infrastructure in a file. I'll use some command, I'll pass that file as an input. That command will execute, it will parse that file, read the instructions and create an infrastructure for you, right? So the first step here is we'll have to create a file called dockercompose.yml. So let's create a file. Here, first thing is we have to specify a version. The valid value of the version is 3. Next, we have to provide the instructions for each service. Okay, so service is nothing but a container, a Docker container, right? So we have to provide a spec for that particular Docker container, right? Now, before specifying the spec for Docker container, let us also specify the prerequisite thing, right? So the prerequisite to run a PHP MyAdmin application is we have to create a network of type bridge. So let us specify that here. We want a network. The network name should be MyNet and the driver should be bridge. So first we'll specify the spec for a backend Docker container, which is nothing but a MySQL database. So I'll give a name, backend. First thing is image. So image is MySQL latest. Next thing is container name. Container name is also backend. Next thing is ports. So the ports here is 3306 : 3306. Next thing is networks. We also need to associate a network with this Docker container. So the network name is MyNet. And then the last thing is the environment variables. Okay, so the spec for a backend Docker container is completed. Okay, the same thing we have specified in a command as well, right? We have specified the name of an image, the name of a container, the ports, network, and the environment variable. Now let's give a spec for a front-end Docker container. Image is PHP MyAdmin. Ports, okay, networks, okay, and the last thing, there is one more thing. So as we have discussed before that the front-end Docker container is dependent on the back-end Docker container, right? So we also need to specify that thing in the spec as well. So there is a field called depends on, wherein you just need to give the name of a service on which this service is dependent on. And the last thing is we have to specify the environment variable. So here we have to specify 2 more environment variables. So the spec is completed. As you can see, I have specified everything here, right? Starts from networks and then the services, right? So let us see how to deploy this application using the Docker Compose. So let us see how to run a PHP MyAdmin application using Docker Compose. So I'll run a command docker compose up -d. Just see the sequence of the command executed here. First thing is the prerequisite thing, that is a network is created, then a backend Docker container is created, and then a front-end Docker container is created, right? Okay, so just verify whether the containers are running or not. So just do docker ps. You will see that both the Docker containers are running, right? Now let us browse an application. Let's check the functionality of it. Okay, and then we'll come back and then we'll remove the application. Let's browse an application. So the username is root, the password is test. Okay, so the application is working properly. Let's just create a database. Let's give a name demo again. So the database is created successfully. Yeah. So the application is working fine. Let us remove this application. Okay, now it is very simple. Just to Docker Compose down. So you will see that everything has been removed. So let us just see the running Docker containers. So there is no Docker containers which is running. So our application has been removed successfully. Okay, so you can see and understand the advantage of using a Docker Compose over plain Docker commands to run an application which comprises of multiple Docker containers. Now there is one more advantage of using a Docker Compose, right? Let's say you are working in a team and you are working for a product which comprises of multiple microservices. Let's say 5 microservices. Okay, and you want that the same infrastructure and or the same development setup has been replicated to all the developer machines, right? So what you can do is you can create a docker compose.yml file, specify everything in that, like what is the dependencies, what the port has to be exposed, is there any environment variable that has to be configured, the name of your network, and the other information, right? So it's the one-time effort, right? Now what each developer will do, it will just get this docker compose file, run the command docker compose up, and then the application is up and running, right? So it doesn't matter you have 2 microservices or 100 microservices, right? I just need to run only single command to run my application. So that's the advantage of it. So that's it for this particular session. Thank you. What I want is, if you like my video, if you like my work, please like this particular video, okay, as a token of appreciation, and please comment and let me know whether you want me to create one more video on Docker Compose with more advanced feature, okay, and any improvements that you want me to do.